Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We're working our way through the book of the Revelation, and we are down to our next to last session. We got this and one more, and we're in chapters 16 through 19 this week. So
yeah, but unbelievable. So in the previous 2 weeks, we covered 10 chapters. we covered a lot.
We have.
So we do slow down a little bit in the next couple of weeks, which is good because there's a lot of stuff going on.
Still a lot of stuff,
yeah.
even though it's not as many chapters.
Yeah, but we saw the seal judgments, the trumpet judgments, and the leading up to what we're going to see this week, which is the bowl judgments. Yeah. So there's a lot of horrific things that have been happening to the world.
We've been introduced to the beast system, the dragon, the beast antichrist, the false prophet. So there's some key players that are characters that are going on. We've got two witnesses. We've got thousands of people, millions of people, billions of people, whatever it is, being saved.
Yeah. And one thing I want to make sure we talk about is the perspective. And I think you brought it up last week, and the idea is if we look at the same event through the eyes of the earth and through the eyes of heaven, we get two-way different answers.
Yeah.
And that's one thing to go about, and we're going to see that.
Yeah.
We're going to see horrific things happening on the earth, and we're going to see cheering in heaven from the standpoint of God's wrath is being poured out, and it's just.
Yeah. And it seems, somewhat sadistic,
Exactly.
from that standpoint. But yeah, I think you used the right word. It's just. It is the right thing to do. And when you're standing in heaven, knowing what we don't know now, seeing what we can't see now, like, okay, see, that makes a whole lot more sense from heaven's perspective.
Right.
And we just don't get that right now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the earth is in shambles, or soon on their way to shambles, and we're in chapter 16 now. And there are what's called the bowl judgments. These seem to happen quick.
Yeah.
Right? Being all in the same day? Probably not, but could be, right?
It's really hard to tell. Of the trumpets and the bowls, the only one that we're given any real timeline on is one of the trumpets. The results lasted for 5 months. So if that's, say, long, then these are definitely going to be really short. The Old Testament and even some in the New Testament uses the illustration of labor pains, birth pangs. These are the beginning of birth pangs. These are the end of birth pangs. And if you think of a woman going into labor, your contractions get closer and closer together and stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
As she's pushing until finally, like, everything pops, right? Delivery. Yep. And that's really what we're seeing here. These are the final contractions before Jesus comes and delivers.
Right. So from a heaven standpoint, this is the end of God's wrath.
Yeah.
After these 7 judgments, God's wrath is complete.
It's been poured out. Yep.
But check out what happens. Right. The first one, ugly and painful sores go on people that had the mark of the beast.
Yep.
And yet they still didn't repent.
Yep.
The sea was turned into blood.
Yep.
So I take it to be true blood, not like blood.
Well, and it says like that of a corpse, so it's coagulated blood.
Yeah, can you imagine? It's
And it's not just a third, because on the trumpets we saw thirds, right?
Yeah,
now it's the whole thing.
Whole sea. Every living creature in sea has died.
Yep.
Rivers and springs also turned to blood.
Yep.
So there's no water.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not surviving very long. All you have is what's left, in your fridge, if there even are fridges anymore.
Well, and what's interesting is if this is like what Moses did with the Nile River, it wasn't just the river, but fresh water in homes also turned to blood at that time. So if this is similar to that, it could be no water for the people who were on the earth.
Right, which now we're very limited, 3 days.
Yeah, you're only a couple of days, which means that this could be happening in a very short time. Right.
The sun is permitted to scorch people.
Yep.
So now we have no water, and the sun is.
So now what's interesting is that they blasphemed his name because of these plagues.
Right.
Right. So they know who's doing it.
Yep.
And they're still blaspheming.
Let's see. It was poured on the throne of the beast, and darkness covers the kingdom.
Yep.
So that would be Babylon, right? Babylon maybe isn't complete darkness.
Yep.
complete darkness
I
or
would think
partial
so.
darkness?
No, I would think so.
Yeah.
And
People
so
are biting their tongues because of the pain.
because of the pain. But notice it's because of the pain of their sores, which was number one.
Number one.
So number
It's
one,
compounding
these
now.
are cumulative at this
Yeah.
point, which makes sense, in a very short time. But also, if you had, so you got a sunburn here in the fourth one.
Right.
What happens when you're asleep at night, or you're trying to go to sleep at night, and you've got any pain? The lights go off, and the pain somehow magically escalates, doesn't
Right.
it? Right?
Yeah, imagine that. Right.
So that's what's going on here.
Yeah. The Euphrates dries up.
Yep.
Which makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways, right? With the heat and everything, but it also allows a path for the foreign armies to come in.
Yeah.
We're gearing up for the ending battle.
For the battle. Yep.
Yep. Let's see. The last one, as the bowl is being poured out, we hear "It is done" from heaven, and it's a huge earthquake, unequaled since humanity has been on Earth. I mean, that's big.
That's huge.
Bigger than any. That's yeah.
And only God would know that. I think that's really interesting that God would have John see that there has never been in human history, which goes back to about page 1 here.
Yeah. Right.
An earthquake this big. Only God would know that.
Right. The great city is split into 3 parts. Islands fled away, mountains disappear.
Yep.
Right. So
it's like
everything's flat now. Yeah, exactly. Hailstones weighing 100 pounds fall on the earth. Right. Bad stuff.
Well,
happening.
And those 100-pound hailstones, or those hailstones, and they're blaspheming the God of heaven and everything. That seems so much like the 6th seal back in chapter 6, which is one of those things which makes me think that the seals are an overview of the whole 7-year period, not just individual events.
Okay, so then that's God's wrath. Now we see what's happening from 2 different perspectives. The first is the Babylon and the prostitute, which we'll get into in a second, and then the second is the economic.
Yeah, so chapters 17 and 18 deal with the fall of, I'm going to call it the beast system, so satanic system that's running the world, okay? Chapter 17 deals with sort of the first half of the tribulation, chapter 18 with the second half.
Okay. So the first, we're at the point where we have a one world nation and a one world religion.
Yeah.
And one world currency and, kumbaya, right?
Well, and it slowly grows that way. Okay,
Yeah.
so the first half, it's really the religion that's running it. It's a one world religion. The government is still sort of consolidating. We don't have the mark of the beast yet. We don't have necessarily one world currency. That's where the economic stuff comes in the second half.
Right.
Okay, so the first half, I mean, think of it. The rapture happens, and
there's a huge void.
There's a void, so somebody's going to come
Somebody has to come in and explain what happened from a God point of view.
Yep, some kind of aliens or religion or something, right?
Right. So God calls it the great prostitute.
Yeah.
Right. So the understanding is it may actually involve prostitution in there from some way, but it's also a corrupt system, a poor system, but it has its purpose, and then it has a downfall.
Yeah. So all throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, false religions have always been likened to sexual immorality or adultery. Okay, if you're God's people, then you're cheating on Him. That's the adultery. If you're not God's people, then you're out there just doing your own thing. And a lot of it did include prostitution and shrine prostitutes and everything. But notice that this prostitute, this harlot, is not just any religion. It's called the mother of harlots or prostitutes. Right. So this is the religion that has been behind every false pagan cult-like religion from the very beginning. This is, some people take it all the way back to the Tower of Babylon, right? Where we will be God. Right. So this is what Satan wanted. I will be like the Most High. This is the religion that's been behind every religion.
Interesting.
That everything else came out of. And that is the thing. Finally, it shows its face, and that's what's ruling the world for the first 3.5 years.
So it falls, but it's really not missed. Is that
Right.
because the economy then is taking over?
Because what happens is they actually say that the 10 rulers, there's going to be 10 regions all over the world. They actually celebrate. They don't want religion running them. They want to run things. But what happens is at the midpoint, and we saw this back in chapter 12 and 13, at the midpoint, Antichrist will declare himself to be God. There is no other religion when he is the God of the world, right? He's possessed by Satan. He declares himself to be God. He gets rid of the one world religion, and now he is the one world religion. That's when we see the mark of the beast take hold, and now you got your economic and government system that gets to run the world, and that's the distinction between chapter 17 and 18. Is the fall of religious Babylon and then the fall of the economic Babylon.
So is it safe to say the fall of the economic, chapter 18, is at the end?
Yeah. Yeah. So what we just saw in chapter 16, those last few days or whatever, that's what's happening there in chapter 18.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, just by way of reminder, because we've said this a couple of times, where we move forward and now we come back a little bit and get a little bit new information, and we move forward and come back and overview. Right. So we've been all the way in through chapter 16. We're down to the end just before Jesus comes back. But now we get an overview of the two halves of the whole 7 years.
Yeah, so with the economic system, economic systems fall. And economies fail all the time. This seems to be a huge failure. It says in a single hour it's been destroyed.
Yeah.
I know we say to take things literally. Yep. Should we take this literally?
Typically, I would say yes. And I know you've mentioned, when we're talking about it, that stock markets crash in minutes, or hours or whatever. It can be that. I did a quick search though, and almost every time that the word hour, that exact same word, shows up in the book of the Revelation, it's not referring to 60 minutes on a clock. It's referring to a short time. It's used figuratively or symbolically or whatever, very normally. And if you look at almost every other place in the Revelation, you look at that and say, okay, I know that's not 60 minutes. It means short time. Right. Here, it's used 3 times in chapter 18. I think it could go either way. It could be a single hour, because it says a single hour, not just an hour, Right. So it could be like that, or it could be a short time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting where you get the perspective of merchants, where they're looking out and saying, we're done.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, anybody that has anything to do with the sea and shipping, you're done.
Yeah.
Right?
Chapter 16 just told us you have nothing. Right.
There's no water.
Yeah.
You're done.
Right.
Biggest earthquake ever.
Yeah. So again, if chapter 16, let's say, spans 3 days, when in there did the economic system collapse?
Yeah.
Was it a specific point? Was it an hour? Was it 3 days? Who knows?
Right. But you can see if an earthquake is splitting Babylon into 3 regions, and there's no more mountains, easily could have wiped out some computer rooms.
Oh yeah, data centers. Transportation.
Exactly.
If there's no mountains, if the earthquake is doing such damage, if there's darkness, if the sun is scorching heat, you're not flying in planes. You're not. Cargo transportation, everything is shot. So it could very well be a single hour. It's done.
We're not recovering from this.
Yeah,
it was another way to do it.
Yeah.
Or another way to say it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, chapter 19. It takes a minute, but we move back to heaven.
Yeah.
Right. So it is a shift, and
we're talking about perspective.
Yeah, it's what we talked about. Yeah, what we talked about earlier with the perspective, because there's a huge celebration in heaven. So, why are they celebrating? And it's because God's wrath has been poured out and His judgment's been served, which is awesome. And Babylon has fallen. And it is a celebration in heaven. If you're on earth, it's a different perspective. You're going through the worst times ever.
Yeah, but from heaven, you're looking at it, and God has won. I mean, His enemies have stood against Him, and they've lost. Right. If you're standing on earth, you lost.
Right. From our perspective, 6,000 years.
Yeah.
right? That
people have been
they've waited.
Well, yeah, especially since it's the mother of all religions and everything has been standing against God for 6,000 years.
When is God gonna do? When is God gonna do something?
Which was the question that the martyrs in chapter 6 in the fifth seal asked. When are you going to avenge our deaths?
Yeah.
Hold on, it is coming. I will take care of it. Here you go.
Okay, so now we have a wedding celebration of the Lamb.
Yep.
So, well, I was always taught that this is the church marrying Jesus.
Yep.
Do you see it that way?
That's what I was always taught. I taught it for a long time.
Right.
Personally, I'm sort of on the fence about it. I've shifted away from that. Not dogmatically, it's absolutely wrong. But one of the biggest arguments is, there seems to be some wedding language with reference to the church. In the New Testament, bright, fine, clean linen here. But you've got that in the 24 elders, which people argue 24 elders, in chapters 4 and 5 could be the church. But I think you see that these clean white robes in chapter 7 as well as tribulation saints. So I'm not sure that it's just the church. And when we get over to chapter 21 next time, is it just the church that's part of the New Jerusalem, or is it all the redeemed? It's really hard to tell. It's definitely believers. There's no doubt. Is it just church believers? That's what I'm not sure about.
Okay, so it's not that there's not a ceremony. It's who is involved.
Who is involved? Okay. Yeah. Who is considered the bride? Is it just church saints? Is it Israel? Right. Is it
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but after this takes place, Jesus goes to war.
Yeah.
Right. We heard about that a lot in World War and all the world wars. Right. Somebody gets drafted. They're going to war. They get married before they go to war.
Yeah. Except he's not in danger of losing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is what we call very creatively the second coming. Okay, right. The rapture is not the second coming. Sometimes people use those terms interchangeably.
Yep.
They're not the same. The rapture is for the church only.
Yeah, and I think from our standpoint, is Jesus is in the air still, so he hasn't actually come back down.
Yeah, he didn't actually come, right? The first time he came, the Advent, Christmas, right? Then the second Advent or the second coming is when he actually steps foot on the planet. That's at the end of the tribulation, these 7 years. The rapture is at the beginning of the tribulation, and we meet him in the air and then go to be with him.
So Jesus is going to war, but not quite yet, right?
Well, so most people
in this chapter,
he's
getting ready to.
Yeah, and he does. It refers to like Armageddon, and stuff here. But what people think of is that Armageddon is this,
one war
big thing though, and it sort of is. But Armageddon is actually one campaign one battle out of a much larger war. So that's why I think John doesn't go into all the detail, because some of the detail, for instance, Isaiah 63 says that Jesus goes to modern day Jordan, Petra, Basra, and he has a battle there. Then he goes up to Megiddo, Armageddon, and has a battle there. Then he comes to Jerusalem and finally rescues and has a battle there. So he's actually stepping foot in a couple of different places. And this chapter 19 just sort of sums it all up, and he's here and he wins.
There is a great description of Jesus, on the white horse coming out. Clothing is dipped in blood. John calls Jesus the Word of God, and he says from his mouth becomes a sword. So do you see that being literal or figurative?
I think it's because it's following the concept of the Word of God, his mouth. I think it's just the words of his mouth.
Right. His words are
sharp as a sword, and they actually because Jesus is human, right? He's still human. He was born a human. I mean, he's God, but he's born a human. He died as a human. He resurrected as a human. He's a glorified human. Humans don't have swords coming out of their mouths, right? Unless you're a sword swallower in the circus, and I don't think he's playing games here.
The wrong way, right?
Right. But I think he's going to speak And
Yeah, and I think that's the word part. Yes, sure seems that way.
Yep.
So oddly enough, an angel then tells the birds to get ready, and you're like, why would the birds have to get ready? Well, they're going to be feasting on the dead
for a long time.
Yeah, and there's some big numbers in there.
Yep.
And the beast and the kings are now getting ready for war. So there's going to be a huge war.
Yeah.
And it's getting set up here.
They're going to attack Israel. They're going to breach the walls. They're going to invade, Jerusalem. They're going to breach the walls. They're going to be killing people and ransacking Jerusalem. And that's when Jesus comes back and rescues Jerusalem before it finally falls.
Yeah.
And it says that he takes the beast, that's Antichrist, the beast man, and the false prophet, and throws them into the lake of fire. Right? And that's really, and the birds are gorging on the flesh of the dead people.
Yeah.
That's where we end chapter 19.
Right. So it didn't get much better this week.
Still a lot of stuff, right? Yeah.
But we can look forward to next week. And next week it's we're back to where God wanted us to be in the first place.
Well, and hopefully this discussion has helped you sort things out. In your mind, you're like, okay, but hold on a second. How is this working together? Yeah. Hopefully we, help smooth things out a little bit if you had some questions. If you continue to have questions, feel free to send them in here. We love answering those. You can comment wherever you're watching this, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, or you can email them in, and we are happy to get those back to you. Next week, yes.
Yeah, the end.
I mean, we've won. We've seen him win here, but it's still pretty gory.
Yeah, I think we have finishing details.
There's some cleanup work to do. Yeah, and we'll do that next week. See you then.
Bye.